Covering international cricket and the world of pro wrestling. This is Stumps and Bumps on SEN with Eric Bischoff and Bharat Sundaresan.
Hello and welcome to Stumps and Bumps, your weekly coming together the worlds of cricket and wrestling. And my name is Bharat Sundaresan. I am your cricket guy. And with me, as always, is the legendary Eric Bischoff. Eric, the cricket world is abuzz with news about Stumps and Bumps. They still can't get their head around how these two worlds are coming together.
Yeah, I don't know what the the metaphor would be like in India, but here in the States, when people say two things go together really well, they often refer to peanut butter and jelly. Like peanut butter and jelly was made to go together. Well, cricket and wrestling doesn't appear to be made to go together, but somehow it does here. So it's kind of fun.
It is, and it did come together in Perth. I've just returned from Perth last evening. I got to see my wife for the first time in a month and a half. That's always a good thing. And the people, I think the two guys who brought the two worlds together really over there were John Cena first, and then Virat Kohli. I mean, John Cena, I think, had a better time of it than Virat Kohli did. We spoke about it last week about one guy with 21 million followers, the other guy with 273 million followers. But the fact that they're able to do it at this latter stage of their career and consistently so just kind of tells you that they say, right? I mean, some people just age like fine wine, and these two certainly doing that.
Well, there's a lot more to it than that. I think to be able to perform at that level, at that age, and to stay healthy, there's a lot of diet, there's a lot of nutrition, there's a lot of stretching, there's a lot of yoga, there's a lot of everything involved to be able to do what these guys are doing at this stage. I have a ton of admiration for them.
Totally. And another guy we have a ton of admiration for is our third man in the ring. And one thing I've learned from watching wrestling and you from being part of wrestling for all these years, you can't have a great match without a referee in the ring. And our referee is our own Nims Azur, Essie and Zone. So you had a grand gala time in Perth. I had to cover a rain-affected, dreary affair yesterday, Nims, but you were just having the time of your life.
I actually didn't realize, and thank you, thank you for that beautiful introduction, Bharat. How are you, Eric? How are you, all the listeners? Thanks for all the brilliant feedback for episode 1 of Stumps and Bumps. It was tremendous. But yeah, crown jewel. I was just speaking to Eric off before we hit the record button, and Perth really is a magical place when they do events. They do events like no one else does, and RAC Arena just was taken over, and just watching the One Day International at Optus Stadium just showed the grandeur that that stadium is, and it's just such a shame that so much rain had to go and ruin it for you, Bharat.
I know, and especially, this is a quirk about Perth, Eric, is the only international venue for cricket which has never had an entire day washed off because of rain. And cricket is a summer sport, so obviously in most parts of the world, summer and rain go together, unlike in Australia. And we have had washed out days everywhere else, but Perth, they were waiting for me to get there, I think, for the first time in 12 months.
They wanted you to feel at home.
Very much so. Yeah, thankfully, it wasn't hair wash day, so I timed that perfectly well. But it was a damp squib, but it did allow me the opportunity of bringing our worlds together. Nims, you read my piece about Kohli, Rohit Sharma, and John Cena, and we just touched on those two legends. I mean, you can add Rohit into the mix. The fact that you had so many wrestling superstars at Crown Jewel and you were there, but the reaction, the biggest reaction anyone of those got was John Cena, was very similar to what happened with the Indians. I was watching the Indians practice, and there were obviously 500 fans just surrounding the Optus Stadium practice area. And you have your modern day stars and Shubman Gill and Washington Sundar and the likes. But the time the crowd went craziest was for Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma, and it made me think. You wonder, right? And it's always happened in wrestling when you have a star of that magnitude. A part of you wonders, will anyone ever get up to that level?
There's always that, of course, but what's really interesting when you look at whether cricket fans looking up to a legend or professional wrestling fans looking up to someone like John Cena. The reason I think that the fans were so behind John is everybody recognizes, and John, announced this is his farewell tour. He's saying goodbye to the fans. And for the fans to come out and want to be a part of that moment, be a part of that history, there's a lot of emotion, right? And I think professional wrestling has always had, probably like most sports, a soft spot for legends, right? And we tend to think of those legends, we put them on a pedestal. We remember how great that they were. But athletes continue to improve. They get better. Yeah, sure, eventually somebody's going to come along and get better, but no one's going to replace the memories that that particular athlete, or in this case, John Cena, the relationship that they created with the audience, when they were at the peak of their game. And it's fun to see the reverence for the nostalgia, whether it's athletes or professional wrestlers. It's a form of respect, and it's a pleasant thing to see.
Sort of link it back to, as you were saying, bro, Virat Kohli, like this was very much, when this tour came out, it was very much promoted as this is going to be the last time we see Virat Kohli come out here. And it like you sort of mentioned, Eric, like numbers don't lie. These people, it's box office attraction. I was at Crown Jewel, and you would have probably seen the footage of the premium live event where so it was a sold out crowd, so 15,000 plus people. And the sea of yellow shirts, they were all wearing John Cena shirts. I've never seen something like that unless it's like a national sporting event where or like a Super Bowl where you see like maybe a whole bunch of people wearing Green Bay colors and a whole bunch of people wearing Raiders colors. Everyone bought in, paid their hard earned to say, not only will I come to see John Cena, I want to represent John Cena and put his colors on my back. It was a truly extraordinary sight.
They're really, I always look at the psychology of things like this and the way people react to certain things. And those fans, those 15,000 people were there to not only represent John, but to experience that moment vicariously through John. And by being there live and feeling that vibe, that vibration, that energy, call it whatever you want, but it's a shared energy. And it's something you can only experience live. But they were there, again, to experience John Cena's goodbye and experience it with him. It's fun. They did the same thing with, I didn't see it, obviously, I heard about it, did the same thing recently with AJ Styles in Japan, where it seemed like it was improvisational, where the locker room came out because it was the last time AJ was going to perform in front of the Japanese audience as an active wrestler. And AJ acknowledged that, and he thanked the fans for coming out. And at the end of the match, everybody came from backstage and really celebrated AJ. And that's that when fans have a moment to share or have a chance to share a moment like that, it makes memories for a lifetime. It creates fans forever.
Totally. And just, what someone like a Virat Kohli, and you speak of John Cena, and I was trying to think about it. When you think of two international superstars from the sporting world, sports entertainment, all the same, who had the kind of impact that those two have had on Australian audiences. It just came to light. I mean, a week apart in Perth, Virat has a game to go at his favorite venue, the Adelaide Oval, which, in my opinion and everybody else's opinion, is the greatest sporting oval in the world, of course. And I can't wait to get you to the Adelaide Oval, Eric. You'll love it. And even yesterday when I landed in Adelaide, there were at least 200, 300 Indian fans waiting for the Indian team, but mainly for Virat at the airport. And it just tells you, yes, he didn't have a great night out. Virat got out without scoring the other day. But the impact he's had on Australia over 15 years. And Australia acknowledges the fact that there has never been anyone like him. To come from the subcontinent and to play cricket the way the Australians love their own players to play, like the greats have said, he is probably the most Australian non-Australian player.
How would you describe the Australians' way of playing cricket? What's the difference between Australia's style, if you will, and India's?
I mean, historically, Australia were always sort of the bullies of the cricket world in a good way. I mean, you go back in time, there was the great Dennis Lilly with his button-down shirt, chest hair popping out, gold chain around his neck, and they always had the reputation of being in your face. AG, I mean, they were the heels of the cricket world. I mean, even though the West Indies were the great team between the mid 70s and the early 90s, Australia were always the heels. And they were like the NWO. Like you kind of didn't like them winning if you weren't Australian, but you still had that grudging admiration that they're so cool still. So I think that was Australia. India was different. Because India became an independent country in 1947. India's identity as a cricket team has grown alongside India's identity as a country. And Sachin Tendulkar, probably the greatest cricketer after Don Bradman to play the sport, played a huge role for 24 years from 89 to 2013. But then Virat Kohli, who I've spoken about a lot now, kind of embodies that modern India. And so now India has become a force in cricket, but they have started playing cricket like Australia. They're in your face, and they've sort of become the new Australia. But Australia will always be the NWO, right, Nims?
I'd agree with that. I'd have to say if Australia was the NWO, then India very much were the D-Generation X of they took the template of Australia and added their own little flair to it. Not a carbon copy, but very much from the same palette. And Eric, I just want to you bring up that superstar factor that we've sort of the Venn diagram overlap between Virat Kohli and John Cena. And I like to. I know you're a numbers guy, and numbers don't lie here. And these two have the ability to fill stadiums. I mean, Perth Stadium, where the One Day International was, has a capacity of 61,000 people. Sunday's attendance for a game that isn't the main event was 42,423. Now,
Wow.
42K went to go see those people. Now, to put that in context, there's only ever been 4 one-day internationals at that venue. Last year, when Pakistan toured, there was only 19,000 fans. In 2018, when South Africa, a very powerful cricketing nation, toured, only 24,000 fans went. Australia's oldest rival, England, when they first played there, 53,000. So we see again the rivalries, not just, you're going to get a great game of cricket. No, we want a story. Because would RAC Arena have filled out for Crown Jewel if it was John Cena versus Sheamus or John Cena versus AJ? And that's no disrespect to Sheamus, but we know the history. We know that rich tapestry that both Cena and AJ have weaved together, not just in WWE, but even separately when they were in TNA, and it used to be a dream match.
Yeah, I mean, it's the power of backstory. Like those two guys could have wrestled 50 times over the past 10 years, whatever the number is. I'm sure it's probably close. None of it would have mattered because of the backstory and the fact that they have wrestled so many times and do have such a legacy as competitors only adds to the backstory and makes their final event that much more special. So yeah, I agree with you, man. It's always about story.
And the numbers don't lie there, as you can see from those figures at Optus Stadium. But we're going to give you a bit more of a backstory. We'll take a quick break here on Stumps and Bumps. Remember, you can be a part of the conversation anytime you want to. Hashtag Stumps and Bumps, because we're going to do a bit more of a deep cut as we talk about one of the great rivalries in cricket, Australia versus England, the Ashes. It looms on the horizon, and we'll touch on that next, right here on SEN.
You're listening to Stumps and Bumps with Eric Bischoff and Bharat Sundaresan on SEN.
And this is Stumps and Bumps, a look at the latest news in the world of cricket, domestically and around the world, with a dash of professional wrestling in there as well. Bharat Sundaresan and Eric Bischoff are your hosts for the evening, and the Ashes loom on the horizon. And I don't know about you, Eric, but to put it into wrestling terms, anytime Australia plays Test cricket, no matter who the opponent is, however long the next series with England is, we always look towards England. It's like, I'm sure when it was January for you, you were still looking towards Starrcade. When Triple H, Paul Levesque, is looking at the Royal Rumble, he's looking towards WrestleMania. Well, when Australia plays any nation, we're looking towards England. And We thought we'd do a bit of a deep dive, didn't we, Brett, into one of the big stories in the past 12 months of a young kid that if you tried to script it, you'd think it was fiction, but this is actually a story that is much greater than anything you could write.
Oh, very much so. And I've been privileged to write about young Sam Konstas, but then also get to know him off the field. He's still just 20. And I can't think of another young Australian cricketer who's had so much of the spotlight thrust on him, and he's in a way growing up in front of our eyes. It's more common in the subcontinent where they pull out teenagers from the wild and just throw them into the deep end, whether it's India or Pakistan or even Sri Lanka. But in Australia, it's rare for, I mean, there have been teenagers who played and made, you know, become great cricketers. But what's happened with Sam Konstas is quite something. And it's something that, you know, you don't have to be a cricket fan to relate with. But before that, I mean, you spoke about the Ashes, and we will take Eric through the history of the Ashes in future episodes. But probably the greatest backstory ever in our sport. I mean, it goes back to 1882 and between Australia and England when the Ashes were born. But I mean, Sam Konstas was born in this century, which is kind of scary. Like that's the one thing as a journalist, you know, as a cricket journalist now. I realize a lot of these young kids coming through could well be my kids. It makes you feel old. And so just to kind of brief you on who Sam Konstas is, Eric. So last year Australia played India, big series. There's this guy called Jasprit Bumrah, the best fast bowler India has produced, or probably the world has ever seen. He was dominating the series, and the first three matches finished. Australia tried a makeshift opener, didn't work out, and then they really needed something. Needed to take a punt. So they take a punt on this 19-year-old kid called Sam Konstas, who'd played a handful of domestic games, but he'd impressed in a couple of those. And they just threw him into the deep end to such an extent that it was Boxing Day, packed MCG, nearly 95,000 people. And Boxing Day is when, whether you're a cricket fan or not, everyone in Australia tunes in. Australia is a very regimented society, by the way. So they'll all watch the grand finals of AFL and NRL, but they will tune in after Christmas the next morning and watch Test cricket on at least for the first hour or so. And this kid just started playing the kind of shots that we've never seen in Test cricket before against the best in the world. And he lit up Australia in such a way that he started bringing in audiences. And for a 19-year-old to do that, it's not that he made a big 100, he made 60 odd, but he just seemed to capture the imagination like no one else. And from that point on, people just thought, oh, this is the wonder kid. He's going to be the next bright star. And it hasn't really worked out like that. And he's had to live out that disappointment in front of Australia's eyes anyway. And it's been quite
But
a
he's
challenge
20
for him.
years
I
old. He's
know,
only
I know.
20 years old.
That's sport for you, isn't it, Eric? Like at times there are advantages when you start young. You can get multiple chances going forward, but and I think in a way it is because of the way he played. It's not even the fact that he made a debut. If he had just made 50 playing normally, people would have been like, yeah, okay, good talent. But the fact that he was playing reverse ramps and he was playing the kind of audacious shots that even the most experienced batter wouldn't play, it just turned him into a sensation. But the flip side is it means that he's always had to do everything under the spotlight.
I mean, you're physically, as a male, you're physically not even mature till you're about 28 years old. So, I mean, athletically, his best days are ahead of him still, right? If you're 19 years old or 20 years old, it's amazing that one would feel that kind of pressure at such a young age.
I feel like he also had the unfortunate nature of being a success from the first go. When you're a success from the first go, it really puts a big burden on you that when you don't repeat that the second go, all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, that was a flash in the pan, wasn't it?
Yeah, and again, then it depends really on the way one is brought up, how responsible of a human being you are by the time you're 19 years old, which, by the way, I was 19 once. I can vouch for a lot of my friends. None of us were remotely responsible or could handle the kind of pressure that media attention brings you. because it brings you a lot of really good attention and a lot of really good opportunities. And it also brings you a lot of negative attention and opportunities that are not good opportunities in a long run. But when you're 19, 20, 21 years old, or in my case, 25 years old and older, you're still not making great decisions. But can you imagine what that pressure feels like when you're 19 or 20 and now you've got all of this success thrust upon you, and if you're not ready for it, it can ruin you.
Yeah, and I think the best example of that I saw in Barbados, like just how quickly things can turn around. Uh, we were there for the first test match, and he'd become social media's darling. He'd become Australia's darling in many ways. Like I said, he makes his debut in Melbourne, and at least 3-4 thousand extra people turned up in Sydney, his home ground, to watch him. Even though the series was at a knife's edge, there was so much excitement around whether India will again beat Australia or whether Australia can finish the story. But most people came to watch Sam Konstas. So we go to Barbados 6 months later, and he posted a clip of him bare chested on a beach, just having a coconut water, whatever else he did. And when that video went out, people were like, "Oh, Sam Constas, like he's our darling, he's a heartthrob." And then he started failing, and the same video was being viewed differently, saying, "Wait, why
Sure.
was he walking around on the beach and not practicing?" Even though he was practicing his backside off. But that's just how today's world works. But it's always worked like that with the media.
Yeah, no, the people love to be there when you're on the rise because they get to be a part of that journey, and then they love to judge you when you fail. That's just the flaw in human nature.
It proved that he was a mere mortal, didn't it, Bharat? Like we saw this wonderkind just jump onto the scene, and we thought, oh, we're sorted, everything's. But as you mentioned, Eric, he's only 19 years old, and he went out playing with that reckless abandon that you have as a youth, where you can just run head first into, you don't think you don't have the blinkers on, you don't have the life experience to do that. But he does face a battle to get back into the squad now.
Mm.
He's got a spotty run of first class scores, another duck, which is zero made. But it did make me sort of think that Bharat, you'd know this a little bit better, because India also has the exact same thing where you'll pluck a young guy out of a small town, or I don't want to say that Sydney's a small town for anyone listening out there, but someone will just be
Yeah,
a 19, even a 16, 17-year-old
yeah.
that all of a sudden then have the eyes of billions of people watching them.
I think that's where the difference in cricket culture comes to the fore because of the way cricket is played in Australia, which is still largely a weekend sport. You play Saturday to Saturday, even in peak cricket season. And I mean the grassroots. By the time you get to 19, if you compare a 19-year-old Sam Constas to a 19-year-old Yashasvi Jaiswal or someone coming from India, the 19-year-old from India has played at least 500 times more than the 19-year-old from Australia. Because in India, I mean, as someone who grew up in India playing cricket in India, you play all days of the week, and cricket is your main vocation. School is one, if you are good, that is. School is you go to school whenever you can, and the school doesn't care because cricket's what you do. So I think you mature a lot quicker in India as a cricketer, and there's media glare on you from the time you're 12, 13, and the competition as well. Like people get really wide-eyed when I say this. In India, when you play school cricket, if you don't make a score above 300, you don't get a mention in the paper because there are so many kids playing it. Whereas in Australia, you make 100 in 4 games, people you still highlight you as the next best thing. So I think they just come up differently, and that's something that Sam Constas has had to deal with, and not to forget that he's part of a dressing room. And Eric, you've been part of so many wrestling dressing rooms. I'm sure you've seen this as well. When there's a young kid in a dressing room where everybody else is an adult, everybody else is either married and has a kid. I can see it with Sammy. He often doesn't know, like, where to hang out with or who to hang out with. There's nobody that he can connect with at that level.
Yeah, I mean, it's just hard to find somebody to relate to. It would be awkward. It's no different than me going to taking my wife out for a drink and walking into a nightclub of 20 somethings. I mean, it's not going to happen. Not because for any other reason. I just don't have anything in common with those people. And this young athlete is probably feeling much the same way.
And I remember there were a couple of moments in the West Indies when, and I think he is someone who has that X factor to him. And I'll be surprised if he doesn't become successful at some stage in his life. For someone so young, I mean, whether it's the Greek background or what, he's got this warmth. And I've personally really become really fond of Sam Konstas off the field. But there were a couple of times during that series when, he's being all macho on the field, but he got out and he looked every bit like a 19-year-old who just had a bad day at school, and you really wanted to just go and give him a warm hug. I remember in Jamaica after Nims, you'll remember that game. Australia win, but he'd not had a great time. I was by the boundary line just waiting for my radio interviews. So he made a beeline for me and he just said, like a little kid, he said, "What are you doing tonight? Like, yeah, if you're around near the team hotel bar, join me for a drink." And I did. And, he just wanted someone to give him a bit of a cuddle. And sport is hard. I mean, it's no fairy tale, but I back him in. I think he'll be back at some point. Because some people just have it, don't they, Eric? Some athletes you see, whether they're successful early or not, they just have that thing, that presence around them, which tells you that they'll become big stars.
And you see that, I mean, it's in all forms of, look, in my opinion, sports is entertainment, right? And clearly, from my perspective, but in every, whether it's music or actors and actresses or a singer, musician of any kind, a dancer, there's always that somebody that just stands out from everybody else. It's charisma, and it's hard to define charisma. We all know that it exists, but we have a hard time explaining what it is because it's a lot of everything. It's personality, it's just positive energy, or an aura, an energy that is somewhat mysterious. But when you've got a young athlete who is gifted in any sport, who has that aura, that charisma, that undefinable quality, but you recognize it the minute it walks into a room from 40 feet away, you know it showed up, right? And it sounds like what this young man has. Hopefully he's got good people around him, good management, lawyers, agents, managers, family, because that really is what makes all the difference in the world in the long run.
Yeah. And when you were just talking about that presence and that impact you have, I was just thinking John Cena going ruthless aggression 20 odd years ago, and here he is. I mean, he had presence, didn't he? And people, Jim Cornette and those guys had seen it at OVW. The moment he walked in face to face with Kurt Angle and he had that first promo exchange, when you look back at it, I think most people who understand entertainment felt, okay, this kid has something special, and how true we all were.
I think another one too, to use John Cena as an example before we put a bow on things, and it's probably a fitting way to wrap up with Sam Konstas, because John Cena had his first WWE opportunity against Brock Lesnar at Backlash in 2003. Now, that was the undercard match to The Rock versus Bill Goldberg for the first time ever. If we were to judge John Cena's wrestling career on Backlash 2003, like we judged Sam Konstas at the Boxing Day test, I don't think we're seeing RAC Arena filled to the brim to see AJ Styles. But look, we'll keep an eye on things. We'll do some deep dives into some of the stars, not just of Australia, but of England as well, as we loom towards the Ashes. But you are listening to Stumps and Bumps here on SEN. The wrestling calendar is heading towards a close with as we barrel down towards John Cena's last match. And I happen to notice a little strong influence in the WWE's premium live events for the next couple of months. But we'll touch on that next, right here on Stumps and Bumps.
You're listening to Stumps and Bumps with Eric Bischoff and Bharat Sundaresan on SEN.
And welcome back to Stumps and Bumps. This is our look at the world of professional wrestling, and we hit it for 6 on occasion here. Here's what's making news and impacting the world of pro wrestling at the moment, because there are only 4 premium live events left for the rest of 2025 on the WWE's calendar. Now, 2 of which are Saturday night's main events, one in Salt Lake City on November 1st, and then John Cena's final match, December 13th in Washington, D.C. The 2 other events, this is actual events in 2025, and sound very familiar to any faithful WCW fans. Halloween Havoc and Survivor Series War Games. So if you're not sure because we know there's a lot of new fans out there, I know that imitation is a very sincere form of flattery, but the first Halloween Havoc occurred in 1989 under the banner of the NWA, but since 1991, it has been one of the most memorable pay-per-views of the lifespan of World Championship Wrestling. Eric, one of the biggest things that we loved as a kid when we'd have our Nitro parties and gather around playing Nintendo 64 and WCW NWO Revenge was that giant pumpkin from the MGM Grand for Halloween Havoc. It has been an absolute staple of WCW, and now NXT brought it back in 2020, and since then, it's also been a staple of their shows. And when you see them reuse Halloween Havoc, they're using the same branding. This is the exact same logo that you saw in 1991, 1998. Like, they really... Someone might have just gone into Turner Marketing and gone, can we borrow that? And just yanked it and took it to Titan Towers. When you see that old, I don't want to say old, but that heritage branding back and hyped up once again, how does that make you feel? Because you were, it was very much woven in the fabric that you had during WCW.
Yeah, I mean, I get a kick out of it because although I didn't create the Halloween Havoc brand, as you pointed out, it was there when I got there, but it became my favorite pay-per-view, even when I was just an announcer before I got into management. Probably first of all, I've always loved the fall. That time here in the States, October is like the peak of the fall colors and the transition between summer and winter, and it's just. It's a wonderful time of year in general for me. As a kid growing up, Halloween was like come on. As a kid, that's one of my favorite holidays, just like everybody else. And then as you get older, when we started producing events, it's like Halloween Havoc was that one pay-per-view where you could do some crazy stuff and people expected it. The rest of the pay-per-views back then when I first started WCW, they were all taken fairly seriously, right? Halloween Havoc was the exception. You could get a little crazy at Halloween Havoc. And as we became more successful, I started looking at Halloween Havoc really as I never looked at anything as like my WrestleMania. And Starrcade was in many respects already branded as the most important pay-per-view at WCW before I even got there. But to me, October was. It was the biggest revenue generator, generally outperformed any other pay-per-view. It was the most fun, and it worked so great in Las Vegas. You get 15,000 people who are in a Halloween frame of mind in Las Vegas and came to party at a wrestling event. You've got a pretty good television show, and I always look forward to it. So I'm happy to see it. I'd like to see it get big again, but I'm still happy to see it.
But just on that, Eric, as you got into the late 90s and, you were kicking WWE's butt and NWO was NWO, did your attitude slightly change at all around that pay-per-view, of the fun element that you mentioned?
No, it only became, it was really until the very end, it was my favorite pay-per-view. I really believed it was going to end up being our largest grossing pay-per-view of the year. And I think in a couple of years it was.
The thing I loved about Halloween Havoc too, and the fact that when the WWE decided to bring it back, was that we've seen a lot of these things, and I think it's maybe because it's a new regime in the WWE, but there used to be a big thing where that, if it came from WCW, it had like a weird, they'd always make, because, history's written by the victors, so they'd always put that. I like that the WWE treats Halloween Havoc as a premium event. This is something that it's got all the heritage. They, in fact, want to, I reckon it probably helps the young talent. They can, for lack of a better term, leech off a established brand.
Sure. I mean, wrestling fans are much like, I'm sure cricket fans. We talked about legacy and nostalgia and, how people feel about, former athletes or professional wrestlers in this case. So that brand, Halloween Havoc, still has a lot of positive legacy associated with it because of a lot of the great Halloween Havocs that we produced at the MGM Grand. Those are legendary events. And big things happen at those events. Sometimes kind of stupid things happen too, like the giant getting thrown off a building into a river and getting, coming back through the back doors, to wrestle or whatever. But, there was some hocus pocus going on too. But there was just a lot of really big, great moments that happened at Halloween Havoc. So I'll always look at it fondly.
Yeah, and you're right when you speak about the giant being thrown off the wherever he was, and he died and he came
Cobo
back to
Hall.
life. There you go. It just seemed like something was just made for Kevin Sullivan, didn't it, Eric? I think he seemed to have more fun with it than anyone else with the booking,
You know
even
what
if it
though?
was
That
hurt.
wasn't. I mean, that was a goofy idea, and Kevin Sullivan was pretty well known for coming up with some goofy ideas every once in a while. But that goofy idea was all mine. Kevin Sullivan didn't have to take any blame for that one. That was all mine.
And you're right, Nims. The fact that it's now associated with the NXT brand, it's a bit like cricket, right? You make runs against anyone if you're Australian, great. But to say that I have an Ashes 100, it just elevates that performance to the next level, even though it's essentially. And similarly, I mean, if you are a young NXT wrestler or a middle-aged NXT wrestler, if you can say I did this at Halloween Havoc, it just suddenly just sounds more grand, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And the thing is too, like they've got some pretty good heritage brands like, Stand and Deliver, Takeovers, all that sort of stuff. But when people mention, oh, we did this at Halloween Havoc, we did this at War Games, all of a sudden that adds just that little bit like, oh, did you? Like it's just one of those things. But I love the fact that I was a big WCW fan growing up, mainly because, as Bharat and I have mentioned before, like it was on our free-to-air television. You didn't have to have cable to watch it here in Australia. It was on every Monday night, branded as International Nitro Wrestling, and I used to always the last voice I used to hear before I go to bed was always Scott Hudson and Mike Tenay. So
Yeah.
Scott Hudson was an underrated, underappreciated announcer. I think Scott Hudson really did a good job.
he's very, very fondly missed within a lot of generations of Australians. But before we put a bow on this edition of Stumps and Bumps, you mentioned retro, how there's a lot of heritage between cricket fans and with wrestling fans as well, because you see that now, because how many heritage kits do you see? In fact, the Sri Lankan women in the World Cup at the moment have a throwback to the 1996 winning World Cup one. And just quietly too, well done to the girls because they beat Bangladesh in the World Cup. So, but yeah, the nostalgia, it just hits people in a place, no matter wrestling, cricket, but it's the one thing that sort of brings us all together, doesn't it?
I guess
It does, and it's memories, right? It's shared memories, shared moments, and you hold on to those. You carry them with you throughout your life. So when you get an opportunity to, brush up against those memories one more time because somebody with a legacy comes, back to the sport or makes an appearance or whatever it may be, you get to relive that.
Yeah, and you can almost, when I see, say, old cricket matches or say WCW events from the 90s, and we, by the way, in India got it on Saturday night and 4 weeks later, so we were well behind the eight ball in terms of what is happening in Nitro. Thankfully, there's no internet back then, so there were no spoilers for us. But when I watch something nostalgic or something that I feel nostalgic about, I can almost smell like
Yeah.
you're reminded of all your senses get highlighted. I remember what sari my mother was wearing or what food we had that day. And that's the beauty of nostalgia.
It's funny, Brat, you say that, and I'll make this very quick because I know we have to wrap up. But I was just talking to our broadcast team for Real American Freestyle a couple hours ago, just to have kind of a team meeting. And I described to them my version of perfect color and play-by-play, and I think this is true in any sport. Is my play-by, and this is the way I was trained, is to describe the action and the environment as if you were sitting next to someone who is blind.
Hmm.
help them see what they're not able to see. Describe the action to them in the way that their mind can see it. Include what the building smells like and what it sounds like for the people at home, right? If you're a good play-by-play person and you do a great job of describing the environment along with calling the action, you're bringing people sitting at home in front of a plastic box into your world. That's the power of great play-by-play. And when you were describing the smells and all that, that's an important part of that play-by-play experience and viewing experience.
It's like, and it truly does, as you mentioned, nostalgia, it's shared memories, it's shared, and that's basically the basis of this program. And while we're all gathering together around our radios or our podcast feeds and things like that, but it's come time to pull up stumps and dim the lights here on another edition of Stumps and Bumps. And just a reminder to anyone that's listening out there, you can be a part of the show by tweeting us. Use the hashtag Stumps and Bumps. Make sure you follow Virat and Eric on their social media accounts to see what they're up to at BeastieBoy07, where you can read some of Virat's great articles, see where he might be popping up on your TV, radio, or newspaper. Eric, you've got your hands full with Real American Freestyle. You've got a big event coming up in Pennsylvania shortly.
Yeah, Saturday here in the States, October 25th, our second event that we're looking forward to at Penn State, which is kind of the mecca of the amateur wrestling universe. But we've got an amazing card and looking forward to it.
I was reading a write-up on ESPN, and they had glowing praise for episode 1, and hopefully can build on that momentum.
We're looking forward to it.
But make sure you follow Eric Bischoff and check out his podcast too, 83 Weeks, on adfreeshows.com. But at eBischoff is where you can find him. At SEN Cricket, if you want to see our videos and clips off the show. And a reminder too, Bharat will be in action because SEN's coverage of the second ODI between Australia and India is this Thursday. It's live and free on your radio and the SEN app. Bharat, they'll be out for revenge.
They will. Virat Kohli's final appearance at his favorite ground. I'm sure he's already headed to his favorite cafe in Australia. I can't name it on air. I don't want 500 Indian fans to show up there. But no, excitement around the city for India being in town. It feels like two main courses this time, not an appetizer and a main course. India for white ball cricket and then the Ashes. All I also wanted to say was you can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Stumps Bumps. And just on that, Nims, my wife Isha is handling our Instagram account, so we need to give her more content. She keeps asking me for it. So give us a follow there, show us some love, and just stay connected. We are here to talk to you about cricket and wrestling.
Absolutely, we are. But on behalf of Eric Bischoff and Bharat Sundaresan, I've been Nims Azor. This has been Stumps and Bumps, and we will catch you same time next week.